Hey guys, so welcome back. This time we're going to be talking about how to structure your systematic review. So let's get started. So within your dissertation or systematic review, this today is specifically going to be talking about qualitative work, qualitative dissertations. So throughout your systematic review, we're going to be broken down into broad sections. So we've got the background, and then we've got the objectives, then we've got the methodology, got the results, and finally the conclusion. And basically, depending on your word count for the overall dissertation is how you're going to prioritize word count to each of these sections. Okay, so essentially the background or introduction wants to be about 15% of your word count. The methodology wants to be about 20 to 25% of your word count, and the results want to be 20 to 25% of your word count. And sort of like the discussion area is really important. That also wants to be about 45 to 50% of your word count. So the bulk of what you're saying, the bulk of your words needs to be in the discussion section within the results and conclusion. So if we're looking at the background to begin with, it kind of wants to be like you want to have a hook there to get people interested, and you want to look at the sort of scoping around the area for why, what's interesting about the topic, and kind of what led you to find this research question. So it's sort of like the background around what's happening. You want to put some current sources in there, but it doesn't want to be too specific in this area. You just want to be talking about kind of like when you've done lots of reading around the topic, include that in here. And so that's kind of like what forged your ideas to get to this point of writing the dissertation about this topic. And then the next part that you do is the methods. And here you need to do a lot of reading about different methodology for qualitative work, and you want to put some sources in, kind of evidencing why you've chosen the methodology that you have. And it's kind of how you're going to use these to answer your hypothesis or your question, and you need to talk about why it's important that this is rigorous. So some people will use PICO or PEO within this section, and the purpose of this is to kind of hone in on what population you're looking at, what they're exposed to, and what the outcome is. And so this kind of this indicates where your search area is going to be, and it's used for exploring research, and it's particularly useful in healthcare research as well. Within the methods, you also want to use your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And this is really, really important, because this is how you are going to accept studies, or you're going to decide actually they're not appropriate to this dissertation that you're writing at the moment. So this needs to be very specific, and you have to think about the broader picture as well. Are you going to include studies, for example, that are in different languages? Are you going to include studies from all different countries or specific countries? You've got to think about the style of healthcare in each of those countries as well, and what sort of research was used within the studies is something important to look at as well. Moving on from there, you're kind of setting yourself boundaries with those, and you've also used the Prisma chart, which I've discussed in previous videos, to break down the number of studies that you've got, and also to help use your strategy with different search terms as well. So within that, you need to talk about what search terms that you plugged into the different search engines, and you need to say which specific search engines that you used as part of your research. And this is important because it's showing how you got to where you are now. You haven't just jumped from A to F, you've taken each step as you should do. And then looking at the different type of methodologies which you will search in the library for. So you need to look at books on qualitative systematic reviews, and qualitative research. And not only will these give you references to evidence why you're doing what you're doing, they'll also give you lots of different tools. There's different types. There's different philosophical assumptions underpinning qualitative research. So you need to choose which method you're using for this, because not all essays and not all work will use the same methodology, and there's different ways you can do it, and there's not one correct way of doing it either. So make sure you state what you're doing and provide different references to back up with citations. So look at different healthcare research and why they've used certain methodologies, and that's what you're going to use moving forward, especially with your data collection tools. You also want to think about ethics and the ethics of whether they've used ethics or what quality it is within the studies, because that will determine the reliability of the work as well. So then once you've done your methods section, then you are going to include start in your results section. So within your results section, you want to describe what you found from the different databases, how many studies you found. You want to show your Prisma chart, showing how you've got down to the few studies you're at now, when you first searched in each search engine or database, how many you started with, so how you've screened these to get down to the number you're at now. And you want to explain how you did this. So how did you break them down from lots of studies to a few? How did you do that? It's important to talk about the characteristics. of the studies that you've put together, and this just needs to be very brief because you don't want to waste word count on describing things. This is a good way, a comparative way, to display your studies alongside each other. So how you choose to do this, whether it's using graphics or written word, is up to you. And then you want to move on to your critical appraisal. So many people will use capitals. And for this, you go on the website and plug in what type of study you have looked at, and it will generate like a questionnaire that you go through, and it will help you to explore within the studies whether they're strong or poor quality, and what themes they drew out as well. And this is a good point to be quite critical of the studies and what they included or didn't include, and where their weaknesses and strengths were. And then you want to talk about how you extracted the data to analyze it. So with qualitative studies, a lot of the resources in the library, so within these books that you find in the library, it's important to look at, a lot of people use thematic analysis. Braun and Clark is a good resource for this. And you want to use citations for why you've chosen this or another method, and how you're going to go about using this within your systematic review, and how you're going to synthesize this. And so using this tool, it gives you themes from the different studies, and it's important to set these out, whichever method you want to use, in order to see what each study has and how you can compare and contrast them with each other. And once you've done this, this is where you start some of the discussion within your work. So you kind of want to answer the questions, so what? Is a really, really important section because it involves kind of applying critical analysis to the studies and what you've been reading, rather than just using descriptive words. So you don't just want to lift what the papers have said. You want to link it to your background, but here is where you're using that sort of higher brain power to critically analyze the studies. So you want to start discussions here, look at implications. So in healthcare, you might want to look at implications for the NHS, or in implications for private healthcare, and sort of explore why something isn't working or is working, related to the topic that you're talking about. And then moving on from this, we're going to look at conclusion. And within this, we can have dissemination of findings. So it's kind of boiling down everything you've analysed so far into more simplified clear ideas. So you want to look at like which studies you've chosen, why they reflect what you're trying to find out with your hypothesis or your research question, and it's kind of like a deep dive into why different studies compare and relate to each other, or why they're dissimilar. And this is sort of applying further critique into looking at the topic from different perspectives. And here you can kind of say why some authors might have argued something and some of the reasons around that, and why it sort of doesn't work with others, but still these studies work for your research question. And you want to use, after you've done this, you want to use reflexivity, which is why it's quite important to keep a reflexive diary. And sort of look at the strengths and weaknesses of the dissertation that you've written. And reflexivity involves what preconceived ideas you might have cast upon the topic or upon your study methods, what assumptions you might have made, and what it was limited by. So one of those could be time, because you have a set amount of time to get it finished by. So that could limit how much time you have for researching, for reviewing the work, for looking what else is out there. Maybe that some studies you couldn't open because you had to pay for them, or it wasn't available in your country. So different elements like that are good to include. And you kind of want to put some implications on, like we were saying, if it's about healthcare, implications on the NHS, or implications on current guidelines. And you want to be, rather than descriptive, quite critical here, and succinct and to the point. At the end, you want to do the conclusion, the last sort of paragraph conclusion, keep it quite succinct. You don't want to just repeat everything you've just done. You want to be to the point about your findings within the systematic review. Once you've done this, you can add things in like a table of contents, and what's quite useful is Word. Word will create a hyperlinked one for you. So you click on something in the table of contents and it skips forward within the document to that section. That's really helpful when you're editing, because as you update some of the subheadings, it updates in the table of contents as well. There's like a little refresh button on the side. That helps keep that up to date. You also want to put references in, so pay attention to whether... attention to how you're spelling things. Pay attention to what type of referencing. So is it Harvard referencing that you need to do, or ALA, different format? So references. You might also want to add an appendix. And that sort of gives some background into what you're doing. So this part usually isn't marked, but it sort of informs some of how you got to where you did within the systematic review. It's quite a good idea to include a Gantt chart. And this is like a projection of where you expect to be at each month down the line within the set time that you're going to be writing this. So it's like an organisation tool, and it also shows that you've been very rigorous and you've been very systematic about your approach to writing the systematic review. You might want to include in there your search limits that you've used for the databases. You might want to also include your CASP tool or anything else that informs how you've got to where you have with your findings within the systematic review. So make sure that overall references, it's really important to do these as you go along. So whether that's having a separate Word document, sometimes I found that was a bit easier, separate Word document with the references. So as soon as you've used something, you put the reference in, you've got the citation can go into the text, because you'll shoot yourself in the foot if you end up needing to do the references all at the very end, because this is very, very time consuming, and it takes hours, and it's easy to lose things as well. So to give you an example, our dissertation was 6,000 words and I had 5+ pages of references at the end. So really important that you do these as you go along. And as you get to the end, your dissertation supervisor can help you with the formatting that your university expects, such as the title page, any abstract, and if you want to do any acknowledgements and a list of images, for example. And generally about formatting the document so it looks professional and neat. If you have any questions or if there's anything else we can go through, just put it down in the comments box below. Thanks for watching.